I'm Danny Prashonik with Blizzplanet, and I'm here with Brian Sousa from the StarCraft Remastered team, and we're going to talk about that. So, Brian, why don't you tell me about a little bit about your career at Blizzard? I know you worked there a long time. I know you worked on the original StarCraft, so tell me about what you do in your career.
Sure. So I'm the lead artist on the classic games team, and I've been at Blizzard, like you said, a long time. I worked on the original StarCraft and Brood War, and when they were talking about doing a classic games revival of StarCraft, they kind of reached out to some of the people that had worked on the original, and I said, why not? I'm coming off StarCraft 2. I'm not sure what's next. Let's stick with StarCraft for another year or two.
Awesome. So did you went from StarCraft to StarCraft 2, or did you do other stuff in between there?
I did. I actually left Blizzard for a short period of time after Brood War, and then fast forward a little bit, and I came back just at the beginning of StarCraft 2. So at Blizzard, I worked on a StarCraft project for like a quarter of my life now. So.
Nice. So why don't you tell me a little bit more about what you did for the original StarCraft, and then what your role in StarCraft or the remaster was?
In the original StarCraft, I kind of did two things. We started out doing units, so I made the SCV, the Goliath, the Protoss Zealot that everybody's with the large shoulder pads, and then we started the first cinematic team. We had some cinematics in like Warcraft 2, Warcraft 1. We kind of fooled around with the pre-rendered stuff, but StarCraft is where it really kind of took off, and we kind of had like dedicated artists working on that. If you'll notice, like the StarCraft 1 cinematics, they're very disjointed, and they don't really follow any kind of story, and that's because we didn't really have a story yet. We had the characters, and we had the ideas, and we had the backgrounds of these races, but we didn't really have like where the actual story was going. So because of our timeline, we kind of did it in conjunction with the development of the game. So a lot of the stories just kind of were, this is part of the StarCraft universe, just not what you're watching, not what you're playing. Yeah. It's over on the side.
So then talk a little bit about how different it was to work on a game, in the late 90s versus the tools and stuff you have today, and how that translated for the remaster.
Sure. So some of the things that I am amazed that we actually did were the sprites, but coming from a 2D background on everything, all of the Super Nintendo games, Warcraft, everything was done with sprites, and then moving into trying to realize that in today's technology it was impossible. We didn't have any of the original assets. A lot of the assets were rendered at different angles with different lighting, and so we had perspective weird if you look at it. But we had to mimic that in StarCraft Remastered, so we didn't change any of the silhouettes. So like working with the sprites was just a pain in the butt, because today's technology, all the artists know you kind of work in powers of 2. So you have your 256 texture map, or your 512 texture map, or your 1024, and that's everything kind of fits in these little boxes. StarCraft, all of the sprites were depending on the size of the sprite. So like at any one time, the Zergling could be like a 16 by 18, a 17 by 15, and as it moved, it would change size. So trying to recapture that, recreate it with today's tools was kind of a pain. We had a whole tool chain that we could actually convert all of the old artwork into like larger 256 maps, so we could mask ours right in the middle of those, and then kind of reconvert it back into the game.
Cool. It's really cool. Were there any particular assets you had a hard time figuring out what they were?
Not necessarily what they were, but we did take a lot of time in the beginning trying to figure out the level of detail we wanted to put into the units. We knew where we went with StarCraft 2, but we weren't necessarily trying to replicate that. We wanted to replicate what StarCraft 1 was. So a lot of things was guesswork. You're kind of looking at it, and you kind of have that eye squint a little bit, and you're trying to figure out what actually is that, But for a lot of it, once we hit the mark, like the Terrans were fairly easy. We all know the Terrans are kind of like these grungy guys,
Right.
and we just rusty, gritty metal, and get that kind of level of detail on these ships. But the Zerg, once we kind of figured out that the artist was like, it was basically a lot of things look like they're inside out. Here's the ribs, and here's a heart, and
Yeah.
here's like just organs, and that's all the Zerg buildings are, like these weird things. And so we got the details up on that, and then we just started flying. We did.
Can you talk about the process of actually updating the animated unit portraits, and how you maintain that classic art style?
The portraits were another challenge because we didn't have any of the originals to work off of. Just what was in game, we were able to extract those animations out and look at them. And what we had to do also, because everything had to be in sync with the original, all of the animations are exactly the same frame rate, and have the exact same frames that the old ones do. And that is where I felt that we could push a little bit towards StarCraft 2 to tie them together. Single player campaign units like Raynor and Kerrigan and Mengsk, we definitely took the kind of the look and the feel of the StarCraft 2 characters a little bit more than the StarCraft 1. So it's got a little bit of StarCraft 1, but mostly StarCraft 2, so you could recognize them. But that aside, like, the portraits are one of those, they're just like kind of like weird cycles of animations that are picked up. And, we had talked about, it's like, what if we did, like 3D with face effects and all of that? And, we didn't have a 3D renderer in StarCraft, so that would have been a big problem. So we were kind of limited by the technology.
Is that something you talked about back then?
At the beginning, we our main goal, we kind of had a big whiteboard of like, hey, what do we do? I know we're gonna replicate StarCraft, but what can we do on top of that? Those the kind of things are on the board, and like, well, we can't do this, we can't do this, we can't do this. Mostly just because of the compatibility with the standard definition and the technology that we had in the game, and the fact that we didn't have a tool set for the art to actually get into the game. So like all of that was kind of developed as we went, and so we mostly just replaced art, 1-to-1.
How big is the team today, and like how does that compare to what it used to be?
The entire classic games team now is probably a little bit smaller than the original StarCraft team. I think StarCraft, we probably had around 50 people total, across the board, artists, designers, sound, and everything like that. And I think our classic games team is about 40 people right now. So I think we did a pretty good job of wrangling everything together.
Definitely. What challenges did the team encounter when bringing it up to like just even a modern computer system?
I think some of the main challenges of was the integration to BattleNet, because StarCraft was kind of on the first BattleNet platform, and we introduced it with Diablo 1, and then we kind of brought StarCraft into that also, but because of all of the things in StarCraft that we wanted to keep that BattleNet didn't necessarily support, like chat rooms and a lot of the multiplayer things were, that were so inherently part of StarCraft, but not inherently part of BattleNet. That was like the largest thing. So on the art side, I don't think there was too many challenges. There were things I wish I could have done. Like if we had time and resources, we could have redone the cinematics, but there were so many things kind of working against us to get new assets into the game like that. We said, okay, let's just focus on what we can get done, make sure that the game is same game everybody loves, and then all of the things on top were kind of like optional. So we have new lighting in there, that's an option. We have additional angles of rotation, those are options. So you can technically play it exactly the same way as before, just with high res graphics.
You mentioned how you changed Raynor for the picture, right, or the portrait, and you also said Kerrigan and Manx. Were there others you guys discussed, or were just kind of like the big players that you thought were the ones that were worth changing?
So we definitely did kind of a pass on all of the hero units, if you want to call them that, like Stukov and Duran. We all kind of went forward to if we did have them in StarCraft 2, see like push them in that direction rather than keeping the old style. But like even one of the things that somebody asked about was on your selection screen for Brood War, I replaced the generic commander with the Golem. Like, why did you replace him? And I was like, well, the other two characters were part of that campaign, and then you had this just generic guy sitting next to him. So for that, I was like, okay, now we have Dugall, we have Artanis, and we have Kerrigan, and so now it all kind of fit together better.
Do you have a favorite out of all of those?
Out of the ones that we did,
Yeah. Or even just a favorite character. Favorite design and favorite character.
Well, I actually think that the new Protoss Zealot came out really well. I had done the original, so it was kind of one of those things where I'd see the original, and then you can see what today's kind of art packages give you, and you're like, wow, I don't even know if that was possible back then, like to get this kind of level of detail and realization. So that kind of thing. I think I got that with most of the stuff. Like when I saw what they did with the Goliath, I was like, man, Goliath looks so good. I did the original, but this one is so much better, like realized and feeling. So I think across the board, I'm really kind of proud with the direction we went. But there's still those little pangs of I did the original, but I like the new one better.
So a few months ago, Blizzard recovered an original StarCraft Master CD. Did that help in any way with this, or is that just kind of like a thing that's it's good we have it, but
It was one of those things where when we heard about it and saw that they had like the master disc, we actually had like a lot of the code still, so it wasn't like they had anything that we didn't have. Mm-hmm. But having that out in the world, it was nice that he made the great decision. I think Blizzard kind of really, I thought the response to what we did, I think he came to BlizzCon this year, and we made sure that he was rewarded for what he did, the good deed. I was really proud of like the whole Blizzard team at that point. I was like, that's great. That's how it should be.
Were there any specific race units or abilities that gave you a hard time to design and make work with, even back then, or then retranslate?
I'm trying to think back then. So the original design, I think it was kind of funny because we did the remaster in less time that it took to actually do the original. And somebody had joked, it's like, well, it's because the design was already done. You didn't have designers changing things all the time. And I was like, well, no, yes, but I think just in general, getting all of the artwork to feel the same was the biggest challenge. We had besides the the things we always talk about, the units. And the buildings, it's the backgrounds, the terrain was really difficult because each cell was a 32 by 32 when we upres it. So and there was like 80,000 of them. So we had to go over 80,000 cells and upres them to 128 by 128, and making sure that like everything was seamless and everything fit together and worked together better. I think that was the biggest challenge, besides like getting the actual like look and feel good.
Do you guys plan to keep updating StarCraft Remastered, like patches and whatnot? And what do you guys have any kind of like schedule with that, or is it just kind of be as things come up?
Right now, I believe we're patching it about once a week. Small things that come up, especially like a matchmaking and lag and all that, because it's a world-based server system rather than just like a region-based. But we are continuing, especially on the art side. We're working on ramps right now, so we're going to have all of the cardinal directions, north, northeast, all that, because the original StarCraft only had southeast and southwest ramps. That's going to be huge because the community has stepped in. Like I said, the community has done a lot of work. The community stepped in and have created their own ramps in those directions, but they're using artwork that wasn't really meant for that, so they don't necessarily look the best. They function, but they're it's form over. So we've gotten all those, and we're almost done with that. So in the next couple patches is going to be a big patch with getting that stuff in, and being able to kind of relay out a lot of the tournament maps, so it's a lot better balance.
Since the remasters come out, have you guys seen like a change in how many people are actually playing the original StarCraft as well, or and how large are those numbers of people still playing?
I don't have the exact numbers, but I do know there was a huge jump. The first jump was when we released StarCraft for free, when we announced that we were doing the remaster. And then when the remaster came out, we also got like a big jump in our player base. And it was across the we were surprised because we kind of knew where StarCraft was being played. Korea was huge, and that was kind of our main focus because that was where the main player base was. But we had huge jumps in North America and Europe and even South America.
Do you guys have any plans to continue to add content to the remaster, kind of like mission packs or anything that would maybe go beyond even what Brood War was, or is that going to stay more into the StarCraft 2 world?
No, we definitely are going to continue to listen to the community, and we have many ideas of what we can do for additional content for StarCraft, keeping it alive. Especially tournament based, getting new multiplayer maps out there. We actually did. It was kind of low on the radar. We made a BlizzCon console to see if we could do it. So like if you go down to play StarCraft here, they'll have like a special console, and everybody that came to BlizzCon will get that in their electronic goodie bag. We didn't announce it or anything, but our team, I'm like, we have to do something, and my boss is like, do it, and so we got it done. And it's cool to see it down there. So like things like that, I know the community's like talked about doing skins or like additional things like that. And as long as it doesn't affect the gameplay, I think we'll continue to weigh all those options.
Um, will StarCraft Remastered benefit from any of the AI stuff that the Google DeepMind they're doing for StarCraft 2?
We actually talked about for single player games, especially creating, because I think there's one setting. Like if you play StarCraft against the AI, you're playing against the AI, and there's no difficulty levels. It's just whatever the program has. So one of the things we had talked about is getting an easy, medium, and hard difficulty into the game, so that you have more of a challenge, and you kind of hone your skills that way. But we're really trying not to affect anything in the multiplayer field. And yeah, the DeepMind thing is awesome. I'm not sure. I know that they've done. They were learning. It was learning with StarCraft 2, but I don't think it was playing StarCraft yet.
What made you guys decide to actually just keep it pristine to the original game as opposed to adding more modern features or other things that StarCraft 2 even has?
That was the first thing. Like I mentioned, we had the whiteboard of ideas, and what we decided to do is not make it for ourselves, and we did. We contacted the community. We contacted pro players, a lot of people that are still involved in the community, and we said, "Hey, we have some ideas for StarCraft. What do you think about these?" And they're like, "Don't change anything." So, but we're like, yeah. Well, if we could change something, like, what do you think about 16:9? They're like, well, okay, you can put that in there, but because like they said, there's pluses and minuses for both. So we did that a lot. We like our first art test that we kind of were going with was almost StarCraft 1.5. Kind of was heavy influence from StarCraft 2, still kind of StarCraft 1, and that did not get a good reception at all. So we said, okay, we have to make sure that everything looks exactly like StarCraft.
So I know you have the ability to like instantly, go from the original to the remastered, basically by flipping a switch, right? Was that hard to actually develop? Because I think that's a pretty cool feature. I really like it.
That feature we actually had in there mostly for testing,
Okay.
because it was one of the things that we had a problem with early on. Is we either had the SD version in there or the HD version in there, and you couldn't really say if it was the correct silhouette, right? Because you couldn't notice it next to each other. So we had the engineers take a couple days, and they put in the feature where it would have all of the assets loaded, the SD, because StarCraft is small. It's a 20-year-old game.
Yeah.
So you could actually have all of the SD assets and all of the HD assets loaded at the same time with the minimal impact. So we were able to put in the F5 key to switch back and forth, and it came up. We're like, we should just leave this in for everybody so they can actually see what the old one looked like and what the new ones look like.
Do a lot of people actually play the old way versus the new way?
There are some people that still play in the SD. We call this actually the options version, because everything we added to the game is an option, right? So if you still want to play 4x3, that's an option. You can play 4x3 rather than 16:9. If you want to play with a 4x3 console on a 16:9 screen, you can play that way. If you want to play with the new lighting, you can play that. So everything that we thought might affect somebody's opinion of the game, we left it an option so they could decide how they want to play it.
So obviously, there's a big new announcement, the new World of Warcraft Battle for Azeroth, right? So it's got a lot of feel. Obviously, you're not going to announce anything, but what does the team think about Warcraft 2 and bringing that to modern systems? Because that's a game that I think a lot of people would still like to play.
We've talked about like what's next for the classic games team. Those kind of things, that bringing back Warcraft 1, Warcraft 2, Warcraft 3, Diablo 1, Diablo 2. Everything that we have is technically like open to doing stuff. So what we're focusing on now is actually the games that we know that are still being played and loved by a lot of people, Warcraft 3 and Diablo 2, getting those up onto the modern Battle.net platform, making sure that like their experience with those games that are still being played work well with all of our other titles, and still have the same amount of love that we give to all of our new titles.
Thanks so much for an awesome interview, and thanks for StarCraft Remastered. It's what got me into Blizzard games. Awesome. So StarCraft holds a very special place in my heart. So
that's great.
Yeah,
I'm glad to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you
so much.
All right.